So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all of you who have joined us today, and welcome to Comcare's September 2022 Mental Health Community of Practice. I'm Megan Buick, and I'm the General Manager of Strategic Partnerships and Engagement Group, and I'll be your host for today's event. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and the lands of which we are meeting today, and I'm joining you from Wurundjeri, from the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land, from Naarm in Melbourne. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, to acknowledge the contribution they have made and continue to make to this region, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islander people who are present. I also acknowledge the cultures of everyone who may be joining us from numerous communities and the richness that these cultures bring to the work we do. Just a note on my team's background. So this features artwork titled Healing Hands, which is by Indigenous artist Dion Duval. This was created especially for Comcare to represent and share through an Indigenous lens, initially through our Reconciliation Action Plan, and really the purpose as an organisation which to promote and enable safe and healthy work. Today's event is an opportunity to discuss workplace wellbeing initiatives and how you can identify initiatives that fit your organisation. We'll explore topics such as integrative approaches to workplace mental health, how to select and design wellbeing programs to align with your organisation, and strategies your workplace can adopt to evaluate, assess and mature workplace wellbeing initiatives. There are many of us online today. We have a great attendance and we thank you for taking the time to participate in this event. And for those of you who have not joined us before, you are very welcome. And we hope today's session is enjoyable and provides you with valuable insights and learnings. And we very much ask you to fill in the form at the end, which is an evaluation to help us keep these events relevant and appropriate for your audience, and obviously very valuable in terms of what might be of value to you. We'd like to hear from you. So today we have 4 speakers. Firstly, we'll hear from Erin Gooey about Medibank's approach to wellbeing and the mental health initiatives they offer employees. We will also hear from Laura Sleeman and Daniel Marklew about the 6 wellbeing initiatives they focus on to support Australian Taxation Office employees. And lastly, our keynote speaker, Associate Professor Karina Juritsma, will be sharing her observations about the current maturity of practices and strategies across organisations. And she seeks to propose 5 foundational elements organisations can use to really look at maturing their mental health and wellbeing strategies. Thanks to those of you who've already sent us questions. As we said, we will have time, we hope, for Q&A, so please submit them through. You can access this by clicking the question mark menu on the icon at the right-hand corner of your screen. So firstly, I'd just like to introduce Erin. So Erin is the Head of Health, Safety and Wellbeing at Medibank. With 16 years of experience across high-risk industries and the corporate environment, her focus is on creating safe, mentally healthy workplaces and helping organisations embed purpose-driven wellbeing programs into operations. Erin is sharing learnings from Medibank's approach to wellbeing and how the organisation ensures its mental health initiatives meet the needs of every employee. So welcome, Erin, and I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm also joining you from the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So thanks for inviting me to share a little bit about our wellbeing and mental health programs at Medibank. For us, finding what fits is about certainly what fits for our business, but importantly, what fits for our people. I'm going to start by giving you a bit of a broad introduction and then focus in on 2 aspects of our program. Firstly, the Feel Good grants, and then secondly, talking a little bit about our Mind Hub. So as a healthcare company, we believe that everyone in Australia deserves to live their best quality of life. That goes for our customers, obviously, it goes without saying, but importantly, it also goes for our people. We care about our people and we want them to feel good, because we know that when they feel good in themselves, they can live their best life and realise their potential. We also know that health and wellbeing is not one size fits all, and it certainly doesn't start and stop when you're at work. So we've designed our health and wellbeing programs to offer people choice, because what wellbeing looks like for me is certainly going to be very different to each of our employees. And our mantra is feel good your way. So Medibank is obviously we're a health organisation. We're a very purpose-driven organisation, and we have a strong vision for 2030, with employee wellbeing a central part of that. And I've popped this slide up here because I think in any wellbeing program, it's so important to draw synergies between your overarching company strategy and what you're doing in terms of wellbeing, and make sure that there's an alignment there. Certainly for us, the alignment is pretty obvious. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's enabled us to embed our wellbeing programs so well, right across the employee lifestyle and in our ways of working. So our Feel Good Wellbeing program includes quite a diverse suite of employee supports and wellbeing offerings. But some of our standout programs include the Diversity and Inclusion program, which is obviously an important foundation for all wellbeing. Our flexible working approach, Flex Better and Future Fit, which have obviously become even more important in the COVID environment. We've got an employee giving and donation program called Feel Good Giving. And we also have a team of Feel Good champions from across the business who are passionate about health and wellbeing. And they're our advocates and champions. In addition to this, we also offer discount private health insurance, salary continuance cover for our employees, and provide access to our health support line, which is a relatively new program over the past sort of 18 months, 2 years, where our employees can offer telehealth support from a nurse or a mental health professional 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, depending on their need. And we've recently added a pregnancy support and a COVID support to that service as well. But the focus of today's session is on our Feel Good grants. So historically, our wellbeing offerings have very much been available essentially to those in a major office. We offered things like yoga, Pilates, fresh fruit deliveries, webinars, and in-person expos and events. But the reality is quite a large number of our workforce don't actually work in an office. So we have customer-facing employees in retail stores across the country. We have a permanent work-from-home cohort in our contact centre and our telehealth roles. Plus, we have teams of nurses, physios and OTs delivering care out there in the community. In addition to this, our data was showing that our frontline employees had higher absenteeism rates, higher rates of workplace stress, and lower engagement than other parts of the business. It was clear that these employees were actually the ones in most need of the wellbeing support, rather than those that we'd traditionally looked after in the office. So in 2019, we decided to make the shift. And instead of deciding what wellbeing programs would be best for our people, we asked our people what they would like. So we really saw an opportunity to design quite a large-scale, high-impact program that allowed all employees to have equal opportunity, not just to design, but also participate in the health and wellbeing programs that we offered. To kick off our campaign and get everyone's attention, we launched with our own big idea, which was the Medibank Dance Off. We chose dancing because dance has multiple benefits to health and well-being, and the endorphins generated from watching people dance can actually be compared to people dancing themselves. And I can definitely attest to this after our dance off. Also, dancing is an activity that can be done with little experience or ability, ensuring that this activation was accessible to all, even those that chose to simply spectate. The dance-off was undertaken virtually it was pretty well in the height of the first COVID lockdown in 2020, and it was a big hit right across the business. It certainly got people's attention, which was our aim. Following the dance-off, we opened submissions for other big wellbeing ideas and called it Feel Good Grants. Ideas that our employees would like to bring to life. The intention of the program was to ensure that all employees are included right across the business, that health and wellbeing initiatives were accessible from anywhere, and that we would truly be living and breathing our purpose of better health for better lives. We really wanted people to think in a bit more of a holistic approach, so not just limited to exercise or yoga and meditation, but across our pillars of eat, move and feel, to align our mantra of feel good your way. The ideas were assessed by a panel of judges, first by the people and then the judging panel of the ELT. And the winning initiatives received funding across FY21 and FY22 to really bring those ideas to life. I'll add, because it might be helpful, that one of the tools that we used in this process was a platform called AwardForce. And we used that both for the idea submission and the initial voting because it enabled quite an easy customization. It was really accessible and a great employee experience. So it was quite a long approach to get there, with a lot of employee engagement right throughout the whole process. But it was certainly something, I think, because most of this timeline that you can see here really occurred during that COVID lockdown period. Engaging our employees in this way, I think, was sort of a bit of a breath of fresh air at the time. So we really were asking them to rethink what wellbeing programs meant to them and how they could contribute, stand up and contribute an idea. One of the other things that we that this program kind of enabled was people once the idea had been deemed to be a winner, then while we would provide support and funding and systems and processes, the intention was that these groups would come together and really form that networking team across the organisation and give people in different parts of the organisation an opportunity to work together, which they might not normally have had, but also bring to life an idea and run a project plan, which is also possibly not exposure that they may have in their day jobs either. So there was some really exciting development opportunities at the same time as wellbeing opportunities. So following the judging process, we finalised our big ideas in August 2020 and then commenced work on bringing those ideas to life. So we ended up with 6 ideas. We went in not sure how many ideas we would get and what they would look like, other than we sort of gave some criteria around shaping up what their submissions should look like and what sorts of criteria needed to tick the box. So we ended up with 6 winning ideas. The first one was around, it's called Growing Organically, which was a series of online webinars facilitated by a horticulturalist on growing and making your own fresh produce. So we've had webinars on growing and pruning apple trees and other fruit trees. We've run sessions on making your own cheese at home. Beekeeping sessions. There's been a whole host of really cool stuff in there. So that was Growing Organically. the second one was around the creation of a Medibank cookbook that you can see up there on the screen. This is how it looks in real life, a big, beautiful cookbook with all our employee recipes in there. The great thing about the cookbook was that we set the recipes out in Eat, Move and Feel, and then also encouraged recipes from all of the different cultures. We celebrated as part of Harmony Week and really integrated that with some of our D&I activities as well. We've run virtual yoga, mindfulness and Pilates classes, including some art journaling sessions that were also really popular. We saw a suite of monthly dance classes using the Sydney Dance Company, and regular crafternoons, which included, I mean, this is not something you would normally see in a wellbeing program, crafternoons, but this is what our people told us they wanted, and it's been really popular. So we've done some Indigenous basket weaving. I think one session we made jewellery, handmade Christmas cards using watercolours. There's been a whole heap in there. And then finally, we actually just launched our very last Feel Good Grant idea on the first day of spring. We recorded our employees, over 100 of our employees and their family and friends, and a few fairy friends as well, singing Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles in I don't know if anyone knows pub choir, but yeah, we went through pub choir and recorded our own song. If there's a little screenshot there on the screen for you. People love that, huge engagement with our couch choir. So all of the ideas and initiatives have been rolled out over the past 2 years now, and one of the benefits was that because we designed all of these activities in the first instance to be undertaken remotely, it actually really served us well throughout COVID, when we all ended up working remotely quite unexpectedly. One of our markers for success initially was the uptake of these programs by our frontline roles. And I'm happy to say that our customer-facing teams actually had the highest participation rates in our new set of wellbeing programs for Feel Good Grants, which is fantastic. We saw engagement scores and EMPS results increase across the board in this period, along with our proactive health and wellbeing marker in our engagement survey as well, which is really positive. So I think overall the program has been considered really successful, and kind of the move to the formal move, I guess, in our way of working to hybrid work has certainly reinforced the importance of having a virtual wellbeing offering. We record all of our sessions, and so we've developed a really comprehensive library that people can go back and review. People who are working different shifts can also go in and out and select activities at a time that's right for them, or at a time when their friends and family can watch and engage as well, which is really positive. Before we jump into any other questions that we might have about that, I've also got some time to mention our Mind Hub, which is another program developed to provide choice for our employees. It's essentially designed to be a bit of a one-stop shop for mental health information, and was originally created to bring our employees the benefits of our Medibank have a Better Minds hub, it's called, that's available to Medibank members. But we really wanted to design something that was just for our employees, that leveraged the different support options and benefits available to our employees in the mental health space. So it's an online mental health resource. People access it via our intranet, and I've included a little screenshot here as part of the deck that I've got there. So this is the landing page. When people arrive on the site, they can navigate to these three main areas: information, resources, healthy habits, and finding support. We know that through the number of page hits that we can track, that we know that finding support is the most popular page people are visiting. So that, I guess that certainly tells us that information and resources is important, but what what they really need, and the reason that they're going to this site is really around finding out what support that we offer. In terms of the support that we do offer to our employees, we've really had a shift over the last 3 to 4 years in the number of programs that we offer in the mental health space. There's previously had been a really strong emphasis on EAP, and often, the amount of times all of you will have heard as well EAP as a offered EAP. There was, a lot of that, because that was our one support mechanism. But what we really wanted to do is make sure that we were not only offering our employees choice, but we had a whole suite of programs that sat right across the different continuum. So over the last couple of years, we've added in Smiling Mind, we've added in Uprise, which is an app that includes a wellbeing assessment, micro learning modules, and we also enable our team to do coaching, wellbeing coaching through that. We recently added in an Indigenous EAP, a specific Indigenous EAP for culturally sensitive counselling and support through the Healing Centre of Griefology. And then the other one is our health advice line that I mentioned before, where employees can get access to a nurse or a mental health professional 24/7. And this is in addition to, obviously, where we've got business unit specific risks. We've got targeted programs such as vicarious trauma. Some segments will have a group debrief EAP. Contact centre tend to do that. And then we've got a grief and loss module for home care. So we're certainly continually reviewing our offering in this space. But I see us increasingly offering really bespoke supports to ensure that we're continuing to meet the psychological needs of our employees. So that's kind of a big overview of just a couple of our programs there, but I'm really keen, if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thanks very much, Erin. That was a fantastic presentation. I'll just call out for some questions, but while perhaps we're waiting for some to come through from the audience, I was interested in what do you think is next? You did call out that you think that this might grow, this particular area, Erin. And I guess what I noticed was you've got a really broad continuum of support services already available for your employees. And I'm wondering what you think might be the next piece that you might want to include in your suite of offerings.
Yeah, and it's a real balance, I think, in between, because we don't want to provide so much choice that we kind of overwhelm and bamboozle people. But at the same time, I do feel like broad brush programs just aren't meeting the needs of people anymore. I think programs like counselling through EAP are always going to be really important to offer, but I do think that that increasingly looking at more bespoke solutions are a good idea. And one example of that is putting in Uprise to deliver specific wellbeing coaching. So looking at more kind of proactive wellbeing coaching. A couple of the other things that we're looking at is around in the health space. So really putting health back into the employee experience. I know I've mentioned a couple of kind of health specific supports that we have, but yeah, in terms of part of our vision is to become Australia's healthiest workplace. That, is such an inspiring sort of vision to have, but really thinking about, well, what does that look like in terms of personal health and wellbeing outcomes, and how can we make sure that we're delivering the services not that are available to our members, our Medibank members. How can we bring that in and make sure our people are benefiting from those as well?
That's great. Thank you, Erin. I'm just conscious of the time. We did start a couple of minutes late, but I think we're probably thereabouts at time, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of questions coming through. Hopefully someone might need to ponder on your presentation, Erin, and perhaps put some through, and you can also respond in the chat, because we've been able to have that available to us today. But I'd just like to say thank you very much for your presentation, and for sharing that with us. It was really interesting. I thought it was great, and certainly learned a lot. And for me, some of this has a real focus on early intervention, and I think that's obviously what you're sort of looking at too. And I think there's a lot of evidence around that. So congratulations on the good work that you're doing. It's fantastic, and really great for you to be here to share that with us.
Thank you.
I'm just, I am conscious a little bit of the time, so we might continue to move. If we just keep going. So our next speakers, just to introduce our next speakers, are Laura Sleeman and Daniel Marklew. Laura is the director and Daniel the assistant director of the Thriving Minds team at the Australian Taxation Office, and there'll be a bit of a link with this with the keynote speaker as well. They'll be sharing learnings from the ATO's burnout and fatigue reduction initiatives, which I think everyone's going to be particularly interested in. I know I'm already really interested, Laura and Daniel, in what you have to share with us. So if I could welcome you to please start your presentation. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Megan, and hi everyone. Thanks for having us along today. As mentioned, I'm Laura Sleeman and this is Daniel Marklew, and we're from the ATO's Thriving Minds team. So the Thriving Minds team is what we call the ATO's mental health strategy team. We're responsible for the delivery of our mental health strategy, and this really includes building capability, raising awareness, addressing psychosocial risk, and providing really targeted and tailored support to our very varied workforce and separate business areas. So since our first mental health strategy was developed in 2018, our team has worked hard to really improve our organisation's maturity in how we deal with and support mental health in the workplace, as well as trying to provide our staff with skills and strategies to use in their personal lives as well. And as Erin very rightly touched on, wellbeing is very holistic. You can't separate the work from the life. So we've tried to touch on that aspect as well. But look, as a large organisation, we have over 20,000 employees with a very diverse set of work types. We have auditors, we have customer facing staff, we have lawyers, we have HR practitioners, we have corporate staff. It's a really diverse mix of employees, and we're constantly looking at how we can best service the different segments of our organisation, both in improving wellbeing and performance to help us really deliver on a lot of those government priorities. So I think this ties in really nicely with the topic of the webinar today, and in terms of addressing some of the timely issues and strategies related to workplace mental health. So what we're going to talk about today is one of our recent initiatives designed to reduce the impacts of burnout and fatigue across the ATO and to help improve wellbeing and performance broadly. Now, this is an initiative that has strayed away from the traditional wellbeing initiatives that we run, like what Erin mentioned before around things like webinars and wellbeing events and the like. So hopefully it will continue on the Medibank trend of looking outside the typical approaches. So before we jump into this initiative, I just want to set the scene and acknowledge the challenging times that we're in at the moment. We are sort of coming out of the pandemic, but we're faced with a range of new challenges, and there's certainly a very important need for us to proactively manage our mental wellbeing and our productivity. So there's no question there's a lot going on. There's, the tail end of the pandemic, there's the new hybrid work, we've had a change of government for agencies like the ATO that is very impactful in our day-to-day. And of course, we all have our own personal work and family lives to manage. So we've seen a bit of a shift in the ATO internally as well. And we are really, I suppose we're always recalibrating to make sure we're addressing the needs of the community, but that is really front and centre for us, again, at the moment, coming out of COVID, coming out of the ATO's processes around debt collection pausing during COVID, and then needing to look at how we continue that process moving forward. So all of that information overload can be very fatiguing for our staff. And many people don't realise this, but the way we actually work when we're in a complex environment such as the one we're in can be really make or break for us. We often can't control a lot about these environmental factors, but we can control a lot about how we run our day, our habits, our approach to our work, and that can really help us during some challenging times. So we'll jump to the next slide, please. And as just a bit of background, I don't think this will be any surprise to anyone who's joined today, but in terms of the why and what research we've been looking at in coming up with these initiatives, there's been quite a lot of recent global data that shows employees across the world are feeling more burned out, are feeling fatigued by their work. Research from both Australia and the rest of the world is showing that burnout is now a widespread concern for people everywhere. The ongoing impacts of COVID and now hybrid work are something that are also testing our new approaches to work and our habits. And through our own internal ATO data, we're seeing very similar trends as well. Staff generally feel they're being asked to do more, with the demands being quite high, and being stuck in a real sort of go, go, go mentality really means that a lot of people don't feel like they have the time to get everything done and the space to think things through, let alone having time to look after themselves, time to invest in wellbeing activities. So addressing the effects of burnout is something that's a really big priority for us, both for the wellbeing and productivity of our workforce. Added to this, people are more frequently returning to the office, returning to hybrid arrangements, which we typically do a 3 days in the office, 2 days at home arrangement. So some of these demands are shifting for our people, and it's really important we give people the right skills to better meet these challenges. Realistically, our roles are unlikely to change much. We do work for a large government organisation. We have got a very fixed delivery of services we give to the community. But if we focus more about how we go about our work in a more conscious and deliberate way, we can certainly find spaces and opportunities for us to better rest and recover, allowing us to lessen that sense of demand and rebuild our resilience and personal wellbeing as we go. So we're going to talk through some of the initiatives that we have implemented, and I will hand over to Daniel to get us started. So if we can jump to the next slide, and I'll hand to you, Daniel.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Laura. So I'll get straight into it. Based on the findings and trends that we've seen that Laura's just described, what we've developed in the Tax Office is a series of techniques to reduce burnout and fatigue across our workforces, which we've been rolling out to business this calendar year. What we're calling burnout and fatigue reduction initiatives are actually a series of research-based techniques that are based on the job demand control model. Simply put, this model recognises that we have elements in our life that drain our energy, our demands, and we have things that recharge us, our buffers. To maintain our well-being over the longer term, we need to achieve a sustainable balance between our life demands and the positive buffers that help improve our resilience. In a world where we're constantly being asked to do more with less, it can be hard to see where we can lessen these demands. And while it might be something of a cliche, it really does present us with an opportunity to work smarter and not harder. And as Laura said, hack our internal environment. By looking at how we're currently managing our work, we can hopefully reduce some of these demands on our time and energy and build up some of the supports around us for when things get rough. So we create space in our days for physical and mental breaks that have benefits not just on our well-being, but also help us focus our work times more efficiently and improve our performance. As we all know, fatigue and burnout is a function of long-term work-related stress. It's not a guarantee when these buffers and demands are out of alignment. But what is guaranteed if we're out of alignment more often than not is that our performance will lessen. At the ATO, we're also in a situation where we're currently trying to reinforce the benefits of returning to the office and implementing hybrid work as opposed to working from home for most of the time. And we're trying to encourage people to really appreciate the benefits and how they can purposefully use face-to-face time in the office through these techniques. While this is going to be an adjustment for many of our people, the benefits outweigh the negatives, so we want to support them the best that we can. As staff readjust to commute times, working in office-based environments, and their work-life balance shifts more towards what they were experiencing pre-pandemic, we want to be able to give people the skills and the permission to focus on their well-being and minimise the demands placed on them by work. Given that we have such a large and diverse workforce, our team is approaching this rollout on a case-by-case approach, where we work directly with individual business areas to better understand their needs. This is important because, as Laura has already said, as a very large operational agency with a workforce of 20,000 odd people, we have a variety of workers and professions, and so finding what fits for us means working with business to implement initiatives that are appropriate to their work types and their workforces. We do this by using our internal Pulse survey data as well as our APS census survey results and qualitative feedback that we receive from our clients. We also have a frontline HR function that provides us with a gateway for direct approaches where we can engage with executive groups and senior leaders to generate buy-in and work with key business stakeholders to support rollout and promotion of these initiatives. Just move to the next slide, please. So while there are many potential techniques that we could use to drive improvements under the job control demand model, we've chosen 6 in particular because they're simple, no cost, and research-based initiatives that have been effective across multiple organisations worldwide. With this as a foundation, it's been a lot easier for us to generate buy-in to at first pilot and then broaden out implementation of these initiatives across the ATO. The 6 techniques that we're promoting are well designed to address either the demand or the buffer buckets, and they have us take a more conscientious approach to how we work. So the first one we have there is deep work. Some of you may be familiar that this is a technique that was popularised by Professor Cal Newport, who's a computer science professor. This technique is about allocating dedicated blocks in your working week where you have no distractions and can focus on deep thinking rather than shallow tasks. It's a technique where we take a break from task switching and multitasking and really focus on work that requires complex thinking. We switch off that mindset where we're constantly scanning the environment for threats or problem solving and doing shallow work, and instead focus on tasks that require critical thinking, complexity, and really engage the parts of our brain that also happen to deliver a well-being boost for us when we successfully complete those harder tasks. The second technique we use is a meeting manners technique, and this is about being more aware of our use of meetings and how they can take time away from our valuable day. This has been especially important to us as, like many organisations, we have over time drifted towards what can sometimes be seen as an urgency culture, where meetings, back-to-back meetings, can sometimes take over people's days. We give people simple tools and ways of thinking about their meetings, where they can focus on what the purpose of their meetings are, what the outcome is, and what progress they might be reporting, and give people simple tips and techniques like setting the defaults on their Outlook for 20 minutes or 50 minutes rather than 30 minutes and an hour to allow for those well-being breaks between meetings. Our next technique is a technique we call email etiquette. Again, this is about consciously using the tools that we have available to us, and in this case, email. This has been really important to us as we've had a workforce working from home largely for the last 2 to 3 years, and there's been in some cases the blurring of the boundaries between work and life, and sometimes with the ease of connectivity in the workplace, it's been very easy for people to check their emails at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. Particularly where we have senior leaders perhaps sending emails, they can unconsciously reinforce an expectation for people that they need to be plugged in. And really we use this technique across business lines to help people reinforce that right to disconnect and make sure that people have a hard finish to their workday and can rest, recover, and not rob productivity from the next business day. Another technique that we've been using is just reinforcing once again the utility of regular manager check-ins for our staff. This one could sit in either the demand or the buffer bucket, to be honest. And while we all know the importance of regular checking in with staff, these conversations are meant to be more focused on well-being and unpacking how people are thinking and what managers can do to better support individuals. This is particularly important for our workforce as we're shifting from, first of all, working in the office to working at home, and now working in a hybrid way. And in particular, as we start to respond to some of the challenging economic and broader environmental drivers that are driving us towards a need to deliver even more for the community over the short to medium term. On the flip side of these demand initiatives, we have the buffer initiatives there. In reality, many people will likely have positive impacts outside of work that act as buffers for them, such as hobbies, exercise, family, friends, and pets. But we still need to make sure that the workplace is balanced and that it can be and provide some of these positive elements for our people as well. Our Flex Your Way initiative is a catchy title that we've come up with just to encourage people to make the most of flexible arrangements that we already have in many of our agencies. They're about reviewing things like flex time, leave allowances, and locations to help people really think about what their work-life commitments are and their work priorities, and really be purposeful about how they plan their week around work and life. For areas with slightly more rigidity around work hours and place, it's about being a bit more flexible about structuring days and prioritising work to bring that sense of control back into the day. Finally, social support is one of the key buffers that we like to promote. We know that having strong social ties and relationships in and out of the workplace is a massive benefit, especially when you're working in a hybrid or remote situation. So while all of these initiatives are research-based and have positive impacts on the work experience of staff, some are more suitable than others to particular work types and organisational settings. So for example, in case-focused areas, techniques like deep work may be more effective to allow for uninterrupted time, to focus on detailed review or writing work or policy work, whereas in scheduled environments, techniques like social support or manager check-ins may be more beneficial. In all cases, what we look at is what is the theory that underpins these techniques, and if we need to tailor them, how can we do that in a way where we're cutting to the heart of the matter and delivering the benefit to the workforce. As we adopt a case-by-case approach to find what fits, areas are undertaking a variety of approaches based on their particular needs and their structure. In some cases, a blanket approach is being adopted by a whole business line to reset the boundaries for that area, and in other areas, they're adopting measures on a team basis. We work with the leadership and management cohort to determine what will work best for their teams, and we support those leaders to sponsor and really demonstrate to their people that wellbeing matters, because we know that staff perceptions of wellbeing and care from their organisation and their leaders are one of the strongest predictors of wellbeing outcomes. I'll now hand over to Laura to talk a bit more about the outcomes we've seen as we've been rolling these initiatives out across the tax office this year. And I'll move to the next slide, please, if we can.
Thanks, Daniel. And whilst a lot of those initiatives Daniel just ran through are very simple sounding, and many of us might anecdotally say, I do a bit of that myself, I do that naturally. What we have found to date has been really surprising in terms of the results. So we've commenced pilots testing these different techniques with approximately 10 business areas in the ATO. And to put that in context, that's several thousand staff across multiple different functions and work types. And we're seeing some really promising results to date. So as a part of the pilots, what we've been doing is conducting pre and post surveys, looking at empirically tested survey measures to help us accurately measure the impact of these techniques and better understand how they work in a really practical setting. So overall, a majority of staff saw improvements in their personal wellbeing. So there was an increase in 20 percentage points in mental wellbeing and the same reduction in perceptions of burnout. We also saw an improvement of around 17 percentage points on perceptions of time and resource sufficiency. So we were tapping into things like productivity and how people are approaching their work. And we saw a number of other benefits as well through our measures, but really I think the surprising piece for us is these shifts occurred in only 6 weeks, which certainly surpassed our initial expectations. And the reason that I've got approximate percentages that I'm providing is we are still rolling these pilots out. We have had new pilots start in the last couple of weeks. So our data pool is continually being added to, and we are seeing a really consistent trend, and we're seeing that data hold pretty stable, which is really pleasing given we've had groups of staff across, lawyers, HR folks, we've had people who are working in debt collection, we've had people who are working in complex case areas. So it's been a really diverse range of staff and work types. Some of the anecdotal comments we've received also show people are now able to more consciously approach their work and feel a lot more in control and organised of their day. Promisingly, 75% of staff also indicate that they wish to continue these initiatives even after the conclusion of the formal pilots had finished. This has actually increased to 85% in our recent data downloads, but again, given it's a wellbeing initiative and we're looking at predominantly improving mental health outcomes, we think that's a really pleasing result, that it's got a lot of face validity with staff as well. Just quickly, some of the other findings that have come through that are really of interest. While wellbeing measures have improved, a lot of staff are still experiencing stress at work and they feel they have high workloads. So we are still seeing those demands remain high, even though the perceptions of wellbeing is moving more favourably. While some or periodic stress isn't always a bad thing, it is unsustainable over the long period of time. So combined with high workloads, it's indicative that burnout fatigue is a problem that is possible to reoccur, so we will be looking very closely at what we do to support staff. It does present us with a great opportunity moving forward to work a lot more closely with these business areas and unpack their work in their particular function, address some potentially underlying psychosocial risks, including looking at things like work design and work practices, which we will hear a little bit more about shortly. We've also identified some of the underlying blockers that seem to be getting in the way of people being able to undertake these various techniques. These types of blockers can be indicative of workplace culture, you know, the always on, back-to-back meeting, kind of I'll get back to your email within 5 minutes type of culture, if that's familiar to anyone. So some of these blockers we are uncovering as we work closely with different business groups and making a really conscious effort with the leaders to look at how they can shift those norms and that tendency. For some, these are very long-standing habits and behaviours though, so it is taking time and practice to look at how we shift our work habits and how we work together more effectively. So as you can imagine, all of this information has been very helpful to shape this work moving forward and ensure that we focus our efforts on addressing the biggest concerns for our staff. So I'll now pass back to Daniel, who will just go through a little bit about how these initiatives fit in our broader program of support before we open up for any questions. So if we can go to the next slide, great. Over to you, Dan.
Great. Thanks again, Laura. While these pilots have been a point-in-time initiative to address burnout and fatigue as an emerging issue for our workforce, the Thriving Minds team also places a strong focus on ongoing support and improving the maturity of the ATO in terms of how we support mental health. So we have a suite of on-demand products available for staff and managers that include learning modules, videos, podcasts, tip sheets and team activities, all of which are designed to build awareness and capability across a wide variety of topics that include personal wellbeing, interpersonal interactions, and various specialised topics like diversity, discrimination, and common mental health concerns. In addition to our self-service products, we also conduct regular webinars and other mental health awareness activities to continue to build on our maturity and capability, where we can also leverage the expertise of experts that include external presenters, subject matter experts, and the ATO's consultant psychologists. As Erin has already said, EAP remains a core part of our service offering, but we're now leveraging EAP in different ways, where we're looking at risk assessing different roles in the office and conducting regular wellbeing checks for people in what we've identified as high risk roles, so that we make sure that our EAP provider is working with us to help us protect our valuable resources and make sure that we can continue to deliver on our full range of services to the community and to internal clients within the organisation. Our current mental health strategy is due to expire in 2024, and in that time we've set ourselves some ambitious goals. We're going to continue to improve the organisational maturity around mental health and meet the needs of our workforce as the environment continues to evolve. So look, I'm going a bit faster here now, Megan, because I'd like to really wrap the presentation up. I hope you've all got some value out of that, but if there is time for some Q&A, let's go over.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a fabulous presentation, and I couldn't help it. I had my group census results sitting next to me, and so I was looking at our, which I already had in my head, but I wanted to check the stats, and I think certainly burnout and fatigue and those sorts of issues were coming through quite clearly in our census results as well. So I really liked the simplicity of your program in some ways, but also that you got results within 6 weeks. So I thought that was fantastic. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I want to know more about the detail, of course, but perhaps we can talk about that at another session or something, because it was really fantastic. I'm a little bit conscious of the time. I'm just quickly checking. We do have a couple of emails. I guess I'll just ask this one question before I hand over to you, Karina, because I know that you've joined us as well. So one of the questions is, one of the audience has asked whether or not you could give us an idea of the take up of your self-help apps and resources and webinars. So I think this is something that we do think about putting the obviously the effort into these, and I liked the fact again that you really draw on the evidence for what went into your resource kit. And I think what this participant is asking is what's that take up like? Have you been able to assess that at all?
I'm pausing to see if Daniel will jump in, because I know he has so
Sorry,
much knowledge.
my audio's just dropped out for a split second, Laura. I've been trying to make eye contact with you.
You can also write it in the Q&A chat too, if you would like to. So we can do that if you prefer to do it that way, because we've got we are sort of looking to move on from a time point of view as well. So
I will look at the question later, Megan. I think I heard you say something about uptake, so I'm going to respond to the question I think I heard. If it's about the burnout and fatigue initiatives, uptake is something that people should expect may take more time than the 6 weeks that it actually took to implement the initiatives and get the outcomes. I think there are a few reasons for that. One of the reasons, funnily enough, is how simple these techniques sound on the surface, and it can be hard to put across to an executive just how much benefit they can get out of an initiative that sounds so simple on the face of it. We initially started approaching business areas in February, March, but we didn't start gaining traction in our organisation until about June, July. And I think the reasons for that is, in some business areas, the risks of burnout and fatigue weren't evident earlier in the calendar year. Other business areas weren't quite sure that these initiatives were tested. So Google sounds a bit lofty for some areas, whereas when we started getting pilot results out from business areas within the organisations, they started to seem a lot more concrete to business leaders across the tax office. So really, we focused on getting a small number of business areas to pilot these initiatives in the early days, knowing that if we put the evidence into empirical measurement and being able to demonstrate the benefits, that we would be able to bring people on board over time, and just really harness the power of data to really wait for that snowball effect. And we are hoping to see, now that people have those census results that you've been looking at, Megan, they have their before picture, and we are waiting to deliver on initiatives that will give them a fantastic after picture.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. So I'd just like to comment, like I said before, if you wanted to have a conversation in the chat, you're very welcome to. So we've got that function available. So that would be fantastic. But a really great presentation, and thank you very much for your time today. And I think quite a few people are putting through the thank yous as well. But also, I just think there's a bit more to this. I'd love to perhaps have a further chat with you guys about your work. It was a really great presentation. So thanks again for spending the time with us this afternoon. I might just move on, because I am conscious of time, and as always, we're running a little bit to time, but we've got our fabulous speaker with us now, Karina. Hi, Karina, how are you?
Hello.
Very much like to welcome you for today's event. So you're our keynote speaker, which we're really excited to have you join us. So Karina is the Associate Professor sorry, I'll start again because I'm getting lost in my notes here, Karina. So our keynote speaker is Associate Professor Karina Dzierzma. Karina is the inaugural Professor of Practice at Curtin Uni's Future of Work Institute, a recently established research institute which promotes productive and meaningful work as essential foundations of a healthy economy and society. Karina's background is as an applied organisational psychology researcher working in non-traditional academic roles, and she holds over 20 years of experience in successfully bringing together academic thinking and industry stakeholders to address critical workplace challenges. Karina has successfully delivered more than 100 multidisciplinary projects, wow, that sounds tiring, in the public and private sectors along a wide range of industries, including healthcare, mining, aviation, fire and emergency, law enforcement, and the Royal Australian Navy. So you're in excellent company. Thank you, Karina. Just like to now introduce, I'll stop talking so that we get on with your presentation so that I don't take up any more time, but really welcome and thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. I'll hand over to you.
Hi everyone, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today, and I was fortunate to catch the Laura and Daniel just then, and I 100% concur with what can seem like simple initiatives around work design are actually, you know, can be really powerful that's there. So I actually got a lot from those examples too. All right, so in terms of time, I was prepared about a 30-minute presentation and then 10 minutes Q&A, but I'll kind of be a little bit quicker around what's here. And you can always have my many slides, like the academic in me. I have put together a lot of slides for you today, but part of that is so that you can actually have them if they're useful to you as well. That's there. And also, I suppose, yeah, so I am going to share very broadly lessons learned from the Thrive at Work initiative and the work we've been doing around working with organisations developing mental health and wellbeing strategies over the last 5 or 6 years or so, and I'll talk you through that. Now, firstly, I'm going to very quickly talk you through, you know, who in the world is the Future of Work Institute and the Thrive at Work initiative, and the observations that we've seen around maturity in wellbeing strategy development, and put to you, I guess, our thinking around potential lenses or criteria around evaluating and maturing practice. So in thinking about what we would talk about today, you know, some of the questions came up and do come up around how employers are selecting mental health initiatives, you know, that are best suited for their organisation, what questions employers should be asking to ensure their strategy is supporting employees the best it can be, and how employers are evaluating the organisation's progression and maturity around mental health workplace. So I'm going to share with you not only what I think some of those suggested criteria or lenses around that maturity are, but also kind of the journey to how we got to coming up with those in the first place. And hopefully some of those things will resonate with you. So it's a lift up from the actual practices or the initiatives that you're doing more through to the broader questions of how you're kind of evaluating that at a much higher level in terms of what your wellbeing, overall wellbeing strategy looks like. And I'm very much hoping that that will be useful to you all. And I feel privileged to be part of a community of practice here. You know, we're trying as well to figure out how we can draw together the research and the resources and evaluate just and really learn from you all as well in terms of what's working and what your journeys are there. So I feel like it's vicariously joining your community of practice today. All right, so very, very quickly, Future of Work Institute is, as was mentioned, you know, we are here to really look at proactively designing good work in the digital age. And so you can hopefully see how that is relevant here as we're talking about work design, mental health, productivity. And we do a lot of work in that space. One of our key initiatives that I've had the pleasure of co-developing has been our Thrive at Work initiative. This began back 2016, 17, where we had some seed funding from our Mental Health Commission here in Western Australia, as well as Australian Research Council funding to really look at helping organisations navigate through how to develop good mental health and wellbeing strategies and improve in this space. So this is before a lot of other initiatives and really before we really have seen actually huge progression around this space. But what we really wanted was to go what's already out there? What do we know, you know, in terms of the evidence base? We wanted to bring together a lot of that research, which has often been really siloed, and practices that are there. And we wanted to do that in consultation with government, industry, mental health bodies, to really not just come up with something new and siloed, but what can we actually do that's practical, that works, and brings together a lot of these lenses. A big part of this was also supporting the full spectrum of mental health, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. A big focus on prevention through work design. So at the start of the journey, it very much was much more of an ill health or an early detection lens, but really bringing that prevention side in, as well as that good health is good business side of things, and really answering that question of where to start has been a key to that the Thrive at Work initiative. When we started, you know, and I think it's still somewhat the space, we saw that there was really quite, there were different lenses that are being applied to this workplace mental health and wellbeing space. Some of this was more of that ill health lens that I mentioned, you know, which is really about supporting people who are experiencing ill health or have mental health issues that are there. And a lot of that was around reducing workers' compensation, you know, spaces, or in that space. Another of the lenses has really been, and where the prevention space sits, has been the changing understanding of legislation and changing legislation in the space. So real safety, health and safety kind of lens space. And then another lens has been more of that future of work space, which is around preparing people for the future learning adaptability side of things. And we started this before COVID, and I must say, like pre-COVID, people were like, whatever, around that future of workspace. In this space, it was very much more sort of prevention and ill health, not, you know, really about future uncertainty and change. But now we've just experienced how important setting people up to be able to learn and adapt and uncertainty can actually be. So it's not just around proactivity and innovation, but in some ways it's almost a prevention-based space that's here too. So we've seen, we all have a lived experience, I think, of how work impacts on mental health and productivity and the challenges around that. But each of these, what we've found around this is, depending on each of these lenses views mental health differently, right? So in many ways, the outcomes that are being looked at look different here in this space as well. So what we have is, you know, if it's around ill health, it's actually around, supporting ill health, versus the legislation is often much more around not breaking people, right? It's normal, healthy functioning, versus that future of work side of things, which is more around engagement, empowerment, connection. And so what we also find is that depending on what these are, there's actually really good both initiatives, but research and evidence that comes from quite different disciplines. So we've got, you know, public health and clinical psychology at one end, we've got a health and safety and work design, and then we have, you know, even our organisational development and strategic HRM and a lot of these other aspects and positive psych that sit there. So it's often a very complicated space, but actually has a lot of really good evidence. And what we want to do is kind of bring those things together. So what the essence of our framework is, and what we wanted to do, was to say, what can organisations actually do to support people in the what we call mitigate illness, but support ill health, and the prevent harm and the promote thriving space that's there. And actually just, what's your intent and what's your focus? You know, are you trying to promote innovation? Well, then EAP is not the answer, you know, for you. But if you're actually trying to support people in that area, EAP is. So it's really around that curation and like its strategic intent behind things. And that is the heart of the framework that we have. So what we have underneath that are these building blocks that are important, and I could spend a long time talking about this, but that's not my intention today. Building further around the strategies that are there. And I would say what we've done and how we've engaged with organisations is actually working around, what have you got? What actually sits there already that fit around these particular areas? And so one lens is obviously to go through, well, how do you you know, do you already have these particular things, or building out, do you want some of these other things in this area around, you know, audits and varying things? And so through that, we're talking about that full spectrum. And what we're really doing is also bringing together multiple disciplines and perspectives, but that everyone can see how these different initiatives might be impacting everything from, and included in here is this sort of prevent harm and the job resources and the demands, you know, sitting at the core of good work design. That's here as well. We're also talking about multiple strategies, primary, secondary, tertiary, individual and system level things, as well as the positive sides of things. Now, if I just sort of go back, and this is the framework, you know, these are the things that we're sort of saying, and hopefully you'll see any of your initiatives and what you have in this space will fit within here. It's intended to be an integrative framework where you can see your pieces that are there. Also, what do you do, right? Where do you start? It often comes with why are you doing this? You know, business case around this, assessing where you're at around this. I'll talk a bit more about this at the moment, you know, figuring out what you're going to do, implementing and tracking, you know, just as has been discussed before, a perfect model of this. This isn't really unique, but it's just breaking that around. And we also note, you know, involving workers, you know, in that process is really important. Now, what can you do? You know, one is this sort of policies and practices. What have you got? What are you already doing? How do they fit? Another is very much this worker experience, you know, surveys, focus groups, those sorts of things are really important. We're talking about psychological states here. We need to actually know what felt experience is, and possibly some of that strategic data that's there as well around linking, you know, and that might be absenteeism, turnover, usage rates, all of these types of things that might sit in this space. So if we're going, the framework is kind of the what, this is some of the how, you know, is go about and do these things. What we found is still people are kind of at very different stages around what they're doing and why. So these sort of questions of what should I do, or how is what I'm doing compared to other people, is very much based on an organisation's resources, their maturity and where they're at. And what I'd like to present to you now is really just these, what we're calling foundational elements, which are this idea of going, what are some reflection questions that we have around what you might want to consider around your own mental health and wellbeing strategy and where you're at, and possibly creating a shared mental model or some abilities to talk to others around how you are similar or dissimilar, or the challenges that sit around these areas that are here. One of these is that we suggest is considering the full spectrum of mental health, and I'm going to break that down. I'm going to break all of these down in a moment with some reflection questions. Another is taking an integrated and coordinated approach. So what I'm saying here is really mature organisations, or, you know, best practice will incorporate these elements. Another is ensuring leadership, support and capability. That's there. Fourth one, ensuring engagement and inclusivity. And the last one, having mature data and evaluation systems. Let me unpack those for you now. So, what do I mean by considering that full spectrum that's here? We actually mean, what we see is mental health and wellbeing strategies across organisations actually look different in terms of what they mean by mental health and wellbeing and what you're trying to achieve. For some organisations, we still see they are primarily about supporting people who are experiencing ill health and early detection or stigma. You know, that's there. For others, their footprint is mostly around psychosocial risks or health and safety kind of lens that's there, or potentially both of those that are there, and potentially the positive, maybe quite individual level kinds of areas around positive psychology, but not really around also, it's about ongoing learning and development and growth and, you know, thriving and future ready, you know, organisations that are there. I'm not telling you your mental health and wellbeing strategy isn't good. if you don't have all of those things. What I really want to do is just sort of, there's an opportunity to go, are our mental health and wellbeing strategies actually meaning the same things? Are we all looking at the same things? So these sort of questions around, does yours consider that full spectrum, or is it more focused around some of these particular areas? You know, and then likewise, the activities, the practices, the initiatives that you have under them, do they actually reflect this? So sometimes at a strategy level, we see that people talk about well-being, you know, and their vision being very much around the whole spectrum of mental health, but actually nearly all of their activities are more focused on supporting of ill health or early detection, and are very little around potentially work design, you know, and those types of things, or haven't really incorporated other learning and development and growth opportunities that are there. So that's the question, is do they match? You know, and so, yeah, do they match your strategic intent is a question that I have around that, you know, so because one, maybe you don't want all of those things yet. Maybe it's a staged approach, but it is this opportunity to reflect on where are you, what do you mean by this? And is this, you know, do your policies, practices, activities match this? Another of these particular things is, you know, really taking an integrated and coordinated approach. One of the things that we see is when we talk about that audit and that stock take and the framework, is that many organisations are actually doing many of those things that we have in that list. So performance appraisals, you know, one-on-one conversations that leaders have, all of these things are actually really key activities to supporting people's mental health and well-being, but aren't necessarily linked to mental health and well-being strategies. So this sort of question of, are those initiatives that you have that are kind of important in that, you know, stock take really included in that, or do we actually only include within those overarching strategies, again, like a small subsection of activities and policies and practices with diversity and inclusion, you know, practices, all of these things that are here. Another really, you know, within this space is that coordination space. Around where does the data sit, you know, or business owners, you know, who owns all of these initiatives? And I'm going to, and then integration that's really here around strategy linked to policy, linked to communications, you know, linked to training, linked to accountability and governance. And if I'm going to just move on from this, because I'm trying to catch up on some time, but do you have an integrated strategy, right? How do you integrate and coordinate these activities? Who owns your initiatives? Who owns the data that sits around these initiatives? How are they connected, and where is their oversight? So it doesn't, you know, we see very vast differences between whether mental health and wellbeing strategies are owned by health and safety, HR, OD, where these reporting lines are, and potentially not suggesting that you have to structure these in a particular way, but you need a coordinating and integrating mechanism, whether they happen to be working parties or what they happen to be, to have this and to ensure that efficacy of controls that are there. We need a way to integrate and coordinate those initiatives. Another one is really ensuring leadership support and capability, which we talk about, you know, which can be visible support, financial support, adequate resourcing. We're talking about leader capability, which is, you know, literacy, you know, what's the duty of care, identifying, detecting risks, supporting and intervening. You know, and by that, we also don't just mean that in the mental ill health space, which is often where the focus has been around training people here, but also around psychosocial risks or work design, you know, or whether people are stagnating in their careers, all of those types of things that are there. And really leader accountability. Who's accountable for these things that are here at that far end? So my questions here really are leaders set up to enact and, you know, support your strategy? Are there adequate, you know, is there adequate capability development? Are there adequate resources in this space? And are there adequate incentives around engaging in the training, the upskilling, and, you know, who owns this? very often we see the types of training that sits around this. Rarely do organisations do anything even beyond participation rates in that training, and it doesn't sit under anyone's KPIs. Sometimes, engagement surveys have KPIs attached around leaders, how many people have done them, but very often many of these other initiatives, it doesn't really sit under anybody's responsibility in terms of who's done this and what's there. So really that's part of the leadership support that sits in this space too, is that clear accountability. Another is, and I'm just flicking through this, engagement and inclusivity that's here. Really, when you're talking about these initiatives and developing a strategy, who's been, are people aware? Are people even aware of the policies that sit around this? Who's been consulted and decision making? Inclusivity, is it really everybody that's here in this space in terms of diversity that's there? Is it for everyone? Is it just for office staff? Have you considered, remote staff, different profiles of people as well? And I think really importantly here, most of these initiatives that we run, or the policies, even performance appraisals, if we say, it's actually the perceptions that people have of their strategic intent that have the psychological impacts that are here. So we might intend them to be for something, but if they're not perceived that particular way, people think of them as compliance or something else, they don't have the wellbeing benefits that are there. So what are you doing to check that they're actually being perceived in the way that they've been rolled out as well? And I'm going to move past that to go to this question of, right, what is the experience at the coalface that's here? What's that lived experience of work? Who's considered and how are those initiatives perceived is really important here too. Mature mental health and wellbeing strategies include, a reflection around these things. You don't have to have this perfect, but it's a progression towards these things. Then lastly, around informed decisions, we still see most activity selection based on external validation, anecdotal feedback rather than driven by internal data. And that's okay to start with. You're thinking of what to put in there. So you're trying to find externally validated things, what's worked elsewhere. But rarely is there a strategy for making sure that you're working out whether this is happening internally for your own organisations. There's often pockets of data around initiatives, usage rates, those types of things, but rarely against outcomes. And then because of that, it's really hard to monitor their internal efficacy that's there. So, we're suggesting do these things. And there's sort of question of, is your strategy guided by data? And if so, what type of data is it actually guided by? And does data guide continuous improvement? So that's me done. These sort of lenses that are here are really the idea behind, and hopefully it already fits with some of the things you're considering and doing. I guess what we've done is we've looked across a lot of guidance documents, a lot of messaging, as well as really fundamentally the psychological literature behind this to go, these are key cornerstones of a mental health and wellbeing strategy. And that's it. And I'm going to stop sharing around that. And maybe there are, what have we got, like 4 minutes or something that we have for us.
Thanks.
Q&A.
Thank you, Karina. I'm sorry that you had to rush through that so quickly, but it was a great presentation. So there's a couple of questions that have come through. So one of them is a great question, and I was thinking the same, whether or not there's evidence for who's best placed to own the mental health strategy and or initiatives, I guess you could almost extend that to. So for example, corporate or HR or, senior managers, what works best from your understanding of where that ownership sits?
I think it's more around that there are clear lines of accountability and visibility for all of those things rather than it's where it is. When we really look across so many organisations, HR sits very differently in organisations, right? Sometimes if we talk about first responder agencies, you know, whether it's, you know, operations is sometimes, you know, actually a better way to do it. Sometimes HR and health and safety are the same function, you know, in organisations. Sometimes, you know, they're very siloed. So the questions is more around that it needs not just senior leadership sponsorship, but accountability and oversight that's there, right, around those things. And depending on mental health and wellbeing strategies, some are a lot more clinically focused, some are more operationally focused around those things. I think that strategic HRM, like this idea of, you know, these bundles and what we talk around to sort of perceptions, you know, whoever owns that in an organisation are really key stakeholders that are there. And I struggle to see how health and safety and HR aren't both really key functions that are here, because when we think about the disciplines, we think about the knowledge that sits there, we need both of those. And really that's what when we say an integrated strategy, we actually mean in many ways a multidisciplinary strategy. I don't think that I don't know of any work that doesn't come from its own lens, right? So safety will say they're the ones that should own it, and HR are like, they're the ones that should own it. You know, that's here. We all bring our lenses. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is we need to find a way in which we actually see how all of these things are pieces of the puzzle and what's appropriate that's there. So I've not answered your question, I guess.
Well, I guess a follow-up question is also around, you talk a lot about data, and I guess what I'm gleaning from that is the importance of data, but particularly data based on your own experience, if you like, for want of a better word, in your workforce. So could you just explain a little bit about the types of data that you're referring to?
So I think the ATO example was great examples of data that was there, right? Like actually, you know, knowing where your psychosocial risk profiles, you know, are in some ways. How do we know those things? Well, we don't just know them by lag indicator kind of stuff, right? Like what do we know from lead indicator? That's employee perception data, right? So whether that is survey, you know, and whether you already have surveys that go out that give you information around those things, or you're building, you know, additional questions in around that, to make sure that people feel like they have role clarity, you know, they feel like they're not being micromanaged, they feel like they have the relational supports that they need. So some of it's that, some of that can be deep dive, you know, focus group data, and I do think some formal and structured, so it's not just one-on-one and informal, but informal, you know, to really make strategic decisions around that. So that's employee perception data. Another is actually more what policies, what practices, what do you actually have? And then we're talking about initiatives, right? We're actually talking about what was the value of those initiatives? Did that change behaviour? Did that change any of the outcomes that are there? So data doesn't have to be, you know, like those real lag indicators that are there, but we can have those right through from people's reported mental ill health, you know, through to turnover intentions, through to burnout, you know, right through to the engagement side of things, is what I mean by data.
Thank you. I feel like we could talk for a lot longer, and I suspect there's more questions. However, of course, we've run to time, but we just wanted to say thank you very much thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your thoughts and your work with us. Just a reminder that we are recording this session for everyone on the call, so that you can certainly go back and hear Karina, but also that the slides will be available on the website. So if you wanted to make sure that you're registered with us, but also if you have joined the webinar, we'll be sending out a reminder that information is published when it is published. But thank you again, Karina. Thanks so much for your time and for this fantastic work. It's really very topical, and I suspect will only grow in importance over the coming years. So thanks again.